Hello and welcome to Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. I'm Becky Parker Geist and I'm your host. Audiobook Connection is your place to learn about the audiobook creative process and for authors to learn valuable tips on producing and marketing your audiobooks. This podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Hello, and thank you so much for joining me today on Audiobook Connection. Today we're going to talk about the listener experience and how you, as someone who is involved in the process of pre-production and the planning of the audiobook, can make decisions around the crafting of that experience for your listeners. So let's jump in. First of all, it's good to take a moment just to think about, for your particular audiobook, what is your overall intent for your listener? Is it for them to change or grow in some particular way, to learn something, to be entertained, to escape? Is it crafting an experience such that parents and guardians of young children will be able to give their child a special experience through the listening of your audiobook? And is that an experience that you want those parents and children to share, or is it an experience specifically for the young ones? What you decide about these questions for your particular audiobook will be sort of the overarching view and perspective and approach to take towards the audiobook experience, that crafting that audiobook listener experience. If you've been tuning into my podcast for a while, you will know that I am all about the listener experience, and there's a really good reason for that. Audiobooks can be great listening experiences, and they can also turn out to be not so great listening experiences. And there are a lot of different factors that play into that. The reason why it's so important that you create a great listening experience is there's a heck of a lot of competition out there, right? A lot of competition for attention. And so we need to find the ways that are going to create the best experience for the listeners, because that is the best way to ensure that they'll tell their friends, right? They'll tell their family. They will share your audiobook with others, or at least the information about your audiobook with others, so that you can ideally, hopefully, sell more, reach more people, have a positive impact on more lives. Those are the most common reasons that I hear of why an author wants to create an audiobook in the first place and to be publishing and active in the publishing world, is to have a greater reach, to reach more people, to have that positive impact. So as we're thinking about what we then want the listener to experience overall with your audiobook, whether it's that changing, growing, learning, being entertained, escaping, engaging in some activity, these are, again, some of the first things that you want to consider. And the time to be considering them is an area that I focus on a lot, and that's pre-production. That is the planning for the audiobook. Why do it then? Because it is, first of all, way more efficient than creating just doing a recording and then thinking about the things that you might have done and then may have to redo in order to achieve the goals that you think of later, right? So let's take the time at the front end to think about what those goals are and then craft the experience from the planning and then moving forward. Let's start off with what we typically think of in terms of that overall goal. Let's start off with nonfiction. Nonfiction, we are often trying to either present information, so we're trying to help people learn something, develop some skills in some particular area, or to develop themselves, to change in some way, or to grow. So these are typically the most common objectives, right, for an author with their book and thus their audiobook. The kinds of tools you may have implemented in the writing of your text in order to achieve these goals can be great fodder for this audiobook pre-production conversation. So some of these that I see that I would say are the most common, because you can break them down into some pretty large buckets, I think, of types of experience. So now let's dive into that first bucket of kinds of experiences and what we can do with an audiobook that is going to be crafting that audiobook experience and providing a really exceptional experience. Okay, so one of those is meditations. If this is the kind of material that you have in your book, then audiobooks are especially valuable to you. And that, of course, is because you can write out on paper or, in text the description of a meditation. You can write the text for like a guided meditation or a prompted meditation. And we've done, plenty of books like that. And the great thing of what can happen with audio is now when you want people to be able to close their eyes and, really focus in and meditate, you can provide literally the guided meditation experience. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to incorporate music as a part of the experience, largely because it supports that experience in a different way in a recording than silence. Okay, silence is great when you're meditating live and not having a recording with you, but you will probably note that, for example, most guided meditations, at least I'll say from my own experience, most guided meditations will include some music if it is a recorded meditation. This helps the listener to know that they're doing the right thing in the moment, basically, right? If you just have silence, there can be an uneasiness. And that's sad in a way, I know, because, we have this life these days feels like there's rarely silence and all the more need for meditation. But all that chatter in our minds can actually be quieted and calmed if we have appropriate music that will help us get to that place, that meditative place. So having music underneath is helpful, but let's talk then about what goes around that meditation from an audio perspective. We always need to consider what our listeners are doing. And the truth is, we don't know what they're going to be doing, right? They might be driving. They might be sitting at home with their eyes closed and headphones on. They might be gardening or riding on a subway or being on a plane, any number of things. And so we have to take that into consideration. Because if we just jump right in, we have, as a listener, we have that moment of, oh, shoot, I can't do that right now. That takes us out of the experience. And our job in creating the audiobook is to try to help people get fully engaged in the experience and stay in it. So what that means is we need to lead into that meditation with an instruction that will help our listener know exactly what to do no matter what their situation is. So that might sound like, if this is not a good moment for you to close your eyes and concentrate, then you can just listen and think about what you're hearing. But if this is not a good, safe place and time for you to close your eyes, then please keep them open. that is an impromptu statement that I just came up with in the moment, but it can be crafted to whatever is appropriate. Now, you might decide that you would rather that they skip ahead, or maybe you'd rather that they have the option. You give them the option to skip ahead. If this is not a good moment for you to do this meditation, I encourage you to come back to it later, but for now, you can just jump ahead to the next track. Okay, now, if this is in the middle of a chapter and you tell them to jump ahead to the next track, it's important for you or whoever is helping you produce the audiobook to make sure that the next track is picking up where it should, right after the meditation. See how that works? If you don't, then you might be saying, well, go ahead and skip to the next track, and they'll miss the rest of the chapter, and we don't want that to happen. So this is how we're really thinking through each step and each action that we're encouraging the listener to take so that we can craft that experience for them in a really positive way. Okay, here's another example from nonfiction. A lot of nonfiction books will have a list of questions. My question to you as the author or rights holder is, what would you like your listener to do in the moment that they hear those questions? Most commonly, the questions you do want them to think about. And what happens so often when we're reading text, especially if we're not in a good place to make notes or, really stop and think, put the book down, really think about it in the moment. Maybe we're busy with our hands, washing dishes or something, and these questions come up. Now, if we want our listeners to really take the moment to think about the answers to those questions that you're going to ask, that you ask in your book, don't you see how it makes so much sense to give them a little bit of time? And I would also venture to say a little bit of music to support them in that process. Just a little something. It would be whatever style and feel, whatever vibe you want that fits your content, right? So if it's business content, if you're asking them to think about their bottom line or their marketing objectives, then it's going to have a very different vibe than if you're asking them to think back to a painful memory that they had as a child, right? Whole different feel. So this is where we're thinking about what it's going to be like for them as they listen. And as a listener, I've had the frustrating experience of listening to an audiobook and they get to a list of questions and they just bang them out. Boom, 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 boom. And it just frustrates me because it's like, what am I supposed to do here? You're not giving me time to think. And it immediately pulled me out of the experience. I didn't really feel like backtracking and then pausing in the moment. It was inconvenient to do that. But if they had given me just a little bit of time, I would have learned more from the audiobook. I would have had a more transformative experience. So I know just from what I have experienced that is, you can make a big difference in how somebody reacts to your audiobook. Okay, here's another one. Exercises. Exercises are, they might be ones that you're asking your reader, listener to write down, or they might be things that you want them to think about. It might be some kind of quiz where you're asking them to make a multiple choice or to rate themselves in certain ways and keep score so that then they can see where they rank in your system. These are like complicated issues, but not so complicated that you should just omit them. That seems to be the typical approach, which is, it's too complicated or it's a visual or whatever, so we'll just omit it. But you're missing out on a really potentially powerful experience for your listeners if you actually attend to it and craft an experience around it. So I'm not going to try to get too deep into how that might be crafted specifically, because there are so many different variables on what that exercise might be. But what I want to point out is that you can guide your listener through the experience in any number of ways, as long as you are paying attention to what they're going to be doing, how long you think it will be appropriate for that pause to be, if you're leaving a pause for them to do a thing, think about a thing, or do something, right? And also, I talked about how if it's not a good moment for you to do the meditation or answer the questions or do these exercises, but for some people, it might be an appropriate moment. So we want them to be able to do that, right? Make their notes or whatever. The point is, give them a simple guided instruction of what you'd like them to do, no matter what their situation is. And then you won't or shouldn't lose anybody in the process. And that is the goal. Let's just take a short pause and we'll come right back. Would you like to earn more from your audiobook sales? If you're an author with an audiobook, you may have noticed that royalties from Audible especially, and other platforms as well, are frankly kinda pathetically low, disappointingly low, and unfairly low considering what it cost you in effort and resources to create it. How is it the retailers are the ones making all the money off your work and investment? As someone who started in the audiobook industry in 1981, I've found it frustrating that authors keep getting shortchanged. The good news is that Pro Audio Voices just launched Amplify Audiobooks, a direct sale audiobook platform for authors that puts you back in the driver's seat. Earn 65% of the gross sales price that you set. Compare that to the percentage of the percentage that retailers give. Run promotions on schedule whenever you want. Create coupon codes. Build community with your customers, since you'll know who they are and how to contact them. Work with a caring, responsive, supportive team to help you succeed all along the way. Get help with marketing. Get paid weekly. We're helping audiobook authors who are frustrated by painfully low royalties and the barriers that prevent them from managing their own products and customers. Amplify Audiobooks is a direct sale platform that enables authors to earn much higher royalties and have way more control. We're disrupting the audiobook industry by putting authors first. Get started today at proaudiovoices.app or go to proaudiovoices.com and click on the Distribution Amplify link. Join the movement. Okay, and let's talk a little bit now about fiction and some of the fun ways that you can really get your listener immersed in the experience to really escape their lives and just really be fully entertained. I would say just number one, top of that list is always going to be work with top talent. So you want to work, and I don't mean they have to be like celebrity top talent. I just mean really skilled, talented actors who can deliver a really great audiobook recording. And I specifically use the word actor here as a way to really highlight that a skilled audiobook narrator is a skilled actor. And we skilled actors are trained in this very thing of like putting ourselves in other people's shoes and expressing the voice of the characters and the author voice, the narrator. This is what we're trained in. This is what we're great at. So working with a skilled actor who is going to be delivering that audiobook narration is number one. But there can also be more than that. Now, If you've written a book that has multiple points of view narration, that's like when you have one chapter written from the point of view of one character and another chapter written from the point of view of another character. These are very common and popular. I love them. And they work really well when you have different actors who are those characters, and then they each read their own point of view. So you have different narrators for each of those different points of view. This is a good way to help your listener really get into the story. And especially if you have a lot of dialogue in your fiction book, taking it the next level is doing a fully immersive audiobook with a full cast where they're speaking, different voices are speaking the dialogue, and you hear the sound effects of the moment, whether it's just the ambiance of the forest or whatever it might be, and then music to enhance that experience. It's like a film in the mind, right? That is a very immersive, engaging experience for listeners. And then I want to briefly touch on what I think is really important. This is also just an aspect of pre-production, and that is thinking about, with your fiction book, if you have sequel in a series to the book that is being recorded, you absolutely should include a sneak preview. And there are other kinds of bonus materials that you can do that will enhance your listener experience because you're helping them get to meet you, like doing a bonus interview, that sort of thing. There are a lot of great things that you can do, but I want to focus in a little bit more on this particular episode on some of these other things. So I just want to take a few more minutes to talk about children's books and what we want for those kinds of experiences. Now, there are a lot of kids' books that have sections designed for parents. And sometimes those sections are at the front of the book. Sometimes they're mixed in throughout the book. Sometimes they're at the end. It's a whole jumble. There's lots of different ways. And with a print book, of course, the child can just sit down with that book and start where the part that's for them, right? They can just start right in on the story. But with audio, that becomes a little bit trickier. So you want to think about and map out what's going to be the best way to handle that. Sometimes it might be that you have one version where you have it just like you do in the print book, so that there might be something specifically for the parents at the front end. But maybe you also create another version of the audiobook that is just for kids, where it's just the opening credits, the story, the closing credits, and that's it. And that could be a bonus for when the parents buy the full book, right? You could do it sort of like a bundled set. If that's not an approach that you're interested in taking, then you just want to craft the experience thinking about how the parents or the adults who are managing the audiobook for the child, that's going to work for them. And do the best that you can to craft it in a way that is really going to be a great experience for them. Make it easy for them to share with their kids. I'll leave it at that. There's so many different versions. If you have a children's book or children's books, and this is something you want to explore and you're not sure what to do about your audiobook, then book a call with me and let's talk about it. We can go through the specifics of your book. Okay. A couple other things. So again, you want to think about the experience of the listeners. With children's books, the body of the book, at least, is going to be for the kids. What would you like them to do? Do you want them to sing along with some song that is a part of the audiobook? If so, you want to craft that experience so that they know to sing along, or that you're just encouraging them to. Of course, they might not. They might feel uncomfortable singing. They might just do it anyway. But if that's something you want to encourage, then saying that encouragement out loud, I think, is valuable. Likewise, if you want them to dance, and you maybe want to provide some specific moves, you can describe those dances that you might have pictures of in your book. But they're not going to see the pictures if they're only listening to audio, right? So we want to think about how can we describe these movements in ways that the kids will pick up on and understand and have fun with. Great example of this is the series Once Upon a Dance. We did several of the books in that series. It is a wonderful series. A big shout out to the Once Upon a Dance folks and the work that they're doing. And then there are other things you might want them, for example, to play a game. And so just make sure that the guidance that you're providing, here's the thing. If there are, usually in a kid's book, there are pictures that you're using to help the child with the story, whether it's adding visual interest or excitement or showing them a different part of the story that they only get from the pictures. And I think of the Alfie books by Shirley Hughes, where that is true. So there are all different kinds of things that you may be using those images for. As you move into audio, you want to give thought to that again, come back to what you were thinking about with the pictures, and now craft the audiobook version of that experience. So how do you guide the child through that experience without the pictures, right? Okay, I'm going to leave it there for today. I cover this kind of pre-production kind of content in various ways over many episodes. It is one of my favorite topics, actually, and it is one that I feel gets really short shrift in so many places with so many production companies. So I am hoping to raise the standard of audiobooks out here. I would love to talk with you about your project, and I hope that you will reach out to us at Pro Audio Voices and book a call with us. Let's talk about your project. Thanks so much for listening today. Have a great day. Thanks for joining us for Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. Please take a moment to subscribe at audiobookconnection.com. The podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Learn more at proaudiovoices.com. Again, thanks for being with us, and please join us next week.